What are the challenges with green energy? Does the industry have an image problem? What role does hydrogen play in a cleaner tomorrow? Welcome to The Challenge with Green Energy, the podcast tackling the tough questions with the green energy revolution. I'm your host, Lizzie Simon, and in each episode, we will be speaking to experts, leaders, and key voices in the industry to uncover the challenges, breakthroughs, and image issues, and the untold stories that are powering a cleaner, brighter tomorrow. So, what is the challenge with green energy? Let's find out. So, hello and welcome to season 2 of The Challenge with Green Energy. So I'm Lizzie Simon and I'm going to be co-hosting today with Andy Lord, who's the CEO of Hydrogen Safe.
Hello.
And we're both really excited today as we're going to be speaking to Clare Jackson, who is currently the CEO of Hydrogen UK. And for those that don't know what that is the UK's leading trade association, which works with government, businesses and consumers to ensure that hydrogen can play its full part in the UK's transition to a low carbon economy. So as the CEO, Clare represents the UK's hydrogen industry to government, in the media and the wider energy industry, ensuring that they understand the role that hydrogen can play in our future energy systems. So today, let's welcome to the podcast Clare. We're so happy to have you here, Clare.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
So I'm sure we've got so much to discuss around your insight on what state you think the hydrogen economy is within the UK, obviously with the current political climate. But firstly, I want to learn a little bit more about you and how you've got to this point in your career at Hydrogen UK.
Yeah, sure. So I first got introduced to the world of hydrogen, about some 9 or 10 years ago now. I always like to tell people that I was working in hydrogen before it was cool. Planning to have a t-shirt with that made up on it. But so I was working for sort of low carbon energy policy consultancy. And one of the first projects that I got put on was with Johnson Matthey's fuel cell division. And I got introduced to this world of hydrogen and just thought it was absolutely brilliant, really exciting, could really see, I guess, the potential of the technology, but also the really critical role that it would have to play if the UK and indeed the world was going to deliver on net zero. So started doing more projects in the hydrogen space and sort of eventually recognised that with the sort of emergence of the UK hydrogen industry and the increasingly important role that it was playing, there needed to be a sort of strong voice of the industry in the space. And so, that's why we started Hydrogen UK, to be able to provide that strong trade association in the space. And yes, that's been my sort of role ever since we sort of launched that in November 2021. I can't believe it's, getting towards 3 years old now. It feels like yesterday, but also feels like we've been around for a really long time. So so that's I guess a little bit of my journey in the hydrogen space.
This is chomping at the bit, but I've got a question for you just on that. So you started the association 3 years ago. Hydrogen Safe's been around for 12, 13 months, 14 months from incubation to kind of delivering. And we've probably only just seen a accelerated uptake in what we do in the last 2 or 3 months. Might be just straight after the election. 3 years ago, when you started Hydrogen UK, what were you talking about? Because there wasn't really an industry. There was a lot of talk about an industry in the UK, but I don't know whether I kind of think that there was one. So I'd be interested to kind of know how you got from thinking about it to where you are with it now.
Well, I mean, there's been a lot of, I guess, really nascent activity that's been happening for a really long time, both the sort of development of technologies and also really sort of like small scale demonstration kind of level deployment. So, for example, the first project that I was involved in sort of back in, 2015, 16 kind of time was the deployment of a refueling station in Swindon. It's remarkable to think that there's been refueling in existence for that long. So there has been sort of little pockets of activity. But Hydrogen UK kind of came out of an existing project that we've been running that have been called the Hydrogen Task Force, which had basically come about when there was a number of probably some of the larger players in the space that had recognised the important role that hydrogen was going to need to play, and were looking to sort of lead and pioneer in that space. And so we'd sort of brought them together to look at creating a vision for what hydrogen could and should look like in the UK. And then a sort of collective position on what were the things that needed to happen to make that a reality. So we worked with the civil service and the then Secretary of State, Kwasi Kwarteng, to try and develop this UK hydrogen strategy, which I guess was the sort of government's first big publication in the hydrogen space, and also the sort of early stages of what have then turned into the hydrogen business models, and some of the policy support schemes that we now see today. And so I think sort of back then, there were lots of plans, there were lots of ideas on paper, and I think what we're now starting to see is those projects going through the sort of development pathway, to the point where we are very hopeful that in the next month or so some of those will be taking final investment decision, and we'll see the first production projects go through the hydrogen business model process and get their contract signed and start getting spades in the ground, which will, I'll be popping the champagne corks on that day for sure.
That's so exciting to hear, Claire. So what would you say have been some of the significant milestones within your career?
Within my career, I think the big one for me was the launch of Hydrogen UK, which, if we're perfectly honest, at the time when we launched Hydrogen UK, we couldn't afford a CEO, so I did it. And then it turns out if you just keep your mouth shut and nobody notices you're still doing it, 3 years later you're still in place. But no, that was I jest somewhat, but that was a combination of a really long bit of work, both from me, my team, and the industry, to get to a point where we could launch Hydrogen UK. So that was a real sort of marker for me, with that launch. And then I think in many ways for me, the big milestones in my career have really echoed and mirrored the big milestones in the hydrogen story. So, the launch of the UK hydrogen strategy, first projects getting announced, all these sorts of things which have been big sort of milestones for the UK hydrogen industry, in many ways feel like big milestones for me. Those are the things that, making those things happen and being a part of that is what gets me out of bed in the morning. And, those are the sorts of things which I, celebrate when they happen. So yeah, I'm a hydrogen girl through and through, very linked to the progress of the industry.
Yeah, well, it does very much so feel like Hydrogen UK's voice is huge within the UK. So, if we have anybody listening who isn't a member of the association and maybe wants to learn a little bit more, what would you say would be kind of the key benefits of being part of Hydrogen UK?
Yeah, there's many wonderful benefits of being Hydrogen UK. I'll try not to sound too much like a sales pitch here, but essentially our responsibility is to try and represent the UK industry. And if companies are interested in being a part of, shaping policy, if they're interested in getting to know what's happening in the hydrogen industry, I think one of the best parts of my job is that I get a sort of front row seat to all the exciting things that are happening in the industry. And there's very little that happens in the UK that doesn't at some point go through Hydrogen UK. So it's a place to get your finger on the pulse and a place to meet the people and the companies that are making it happen. Great place to meet people like Hydrogen Safe, one of our obviously favourite members. Not that we're allowed to have favourites, but it's a place to get to know what's happening, to get to know the people in the industry and the companies in the industry, and be a part of shaping hydrogen's future in the UK.
You forgot to mention the dancing. And
I forgot to mention, we also have a fantastic annual conference with an awards dinner the night before, where you too can see Andy Lord making shapes on the dance floor.
So you kind of mentioned it a little bit before, Claire, but you work with all different types of businesses and consumers all across the value chain within the hydrogen sector. So you've probably got a fairly good insight into essentially what jobs are going to be changing, what skills are going to be needed. And that is really going to be the kind of key focus for this season of the podcast. So I'm interested to have your insight on where you think there's going to be the biggest amount of change.
Yeah, I think We try and make this a little bit of this distinction between hydrogen skills and skills for hydrogen. There's a lot of jobs out there and people working at the moment, and actually they've got a lot of the skills which are applicable to the hydrogen industry. And actually, as we're creating this new market, there are going to be lots and lots of opportunities for people to get involved in the hydrogen industry. And it may be that there's people who have got skills that they don't even know are applicable to hydrogen. And so, those are the types of things that we're trying to sort of tease out. What are the skills that we're going to need? Where do they already exist? Where can we transition people from industries that are diminishing in the energy space and sort of transition them into new, exciting, clean areas like hydrogen? Another thing which I think is also at the back of our minds is that it's not just hydrogen. Hydrogen's going to create a lot of jobs. It's also going to need a lot of skills in order to be able to deliver. And hydrogen's not the only sector that is facing this massive opportunity and massive challenge. This is the case across the net zero. Essentially, it's a massive infrastructure challenge to deliver net zero. And that's across renewables, hydrogen, CCS, storage. All of these different things are going to need a huge number of skilled workers if we're going to be able to deliver. So part of Hydrogen UK's focus is trying to identify that and then trying to work with the various different bodies that are already in existence doing some great work in the skills space to try and help transition the workforce and also make sure that we have the sort of training and the skills to bring in a whole new cohort, recognizing that young people need to get excited about the energy transition and want to play a part in that. And what can we do to demonstrate that this is a really exciting place to work and to build a career? And 2050 is a long way away, and there's a huge number of different things that need to take place and skills and opportunities to get stuck in. So that's part of what we're doing at Hydrogen UK.
When this podcast goes out, this will be in the past, but it's my daughter's birthday tomorrow. And she's a strong, powerful female, right? She's been brought up to go and be whatever you want to be. And Lizzie and I spoke about diversity in the energy sector, full stop. Our first podcast guest, strong female engineer. And we spoke about diversity, and it is on the kind of topic for everybody. And one of the things that Lizzie and I discussed was I think we have a perfect opportunity to rebadge and rename some of the jobs that are being created. Have a real think about the job title, which is often the first thing that people read when they go into a new industry, and make them more attractive for a diverse workforce. I just wonder if that is on the agenda for Hydrogen UK, and if it's not, how do we help with that process?
Yeah, well, I think it's definitely on the agenda of Hydrogen UK as to how do we make jobs in hydrogen attractive. Ultimately, as I said, we're going to need a lot of people if we're going to deliver on our hydrogen ambitions. And so we need to be attracting and encouraging people into the sector. And part of that is around image. When people think energy, they think quite sort of traditional, male-heavy industry. And actually, certainly that's not what I see when I look at the hydrogen sector. This is the young upstart, new kid on the block, disruptor within the energy sector, and actually has perhaps a little bit more in common with some of the cutting edge tech sector. So there's lots and lots that the hydrogen sector has got going for it and that is attractive to young people. We just need to make sure that we're telling that story. And I think the other thing that we're seeing within the sort of, as you said, Andy, the sort of TikTok generation. I must join TikTok at some point, so I know what all the fuss is about. But is people want to be part of something which is positive, which is making a difference in the world, and what can make a bigger difference in the world than tackling climate change? It is the biggest challenge that facing humanity today, and so for young people who are increasingly not just looking to earn a paycheck, but also looking to make a positive difference in the world. hydrogen's a great place to come and build a career where you are making a really positive contribution to the world, tackling climate change, tackling inequality, and all these things which are hugely important. And I think personally that that's a story that we need to make sure that we're telling to our young people.
Definitely. And I think kind of going back to what you were saying before about how it's not just about the direct jobs related to the hydrogen sector. There's so many jobs and roles that can be influenced. And, I think it's about almost that education piece that is needed to unlock kind of people understanding it. So something that we're doing as a business is we're looking to almost put together a hydrogen skills framework that then can be used by industry and used by educators to offer that pathway. And it very much so seems like that's something that your business at Hydrogen UK, you're also doing with the recent reports that you've released.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's some things which are really obvious. Of course we need engineers, but we also need an absolute ton of welders. And I think we need to sort of tackle this issue that we have in the UK, which isn't necessarily the case in other countries, where somehow we've elevated professions where you need a degree above professions where you don't. And actually, the most important things that we need are often these sort of technical skills, and that's where we need to be focusing a lot of attention, is on getting people into sort of technical courses and getting those sorts of skills that are actually needed to deliver. And it's not obviously. I have an engineering degree. Engineers are hugely important, but it's all sorts of different sorts of things. And I think people have in their minds sometimes an idea as to what skills look like in the hydrogen sector, and they look like so many different things. There's so many different skills which are applicable to the hydrogen sector, whether it's marketing, whether it's HR, there's all sorts of different things which can be applied in the hydrogen sector. So, don't count yourself out is I guess is my message, regardless of what you're interested in and what your skill set is. There's a place for you in the hydrogen world.
Definitely. I was reading something the other day that was saying how, chefs will need to learn to use different types of gases, or, the emergency response, they might need to have training on what to do if they go to a hydrogen gas leak. And it's, it's all these different skills that aren't necessarily thought about, but are going to be so important.
Yeah, I mean, hydrogen is going to touch every part of our energy system, every part of our lives. And I mean, this isn't just a case for the skills area. We also need to be making sure that we're bringing consumers along on that journey with us, so that they can start to familiarize themselves with the technologies, not just hydrogen, but many other technologies that are going to become sort of commonplace in their lives. So yeah, it's very, very widespread range of different areas that hydrogen might touch, from the products that you're buying that are made with hydrogen, to the bus that you might sit on to get you to work in the morning, right through to, as you said, if you're in commercial catering, you might one day be using a hydrogen cooker. Who knows?
I was with a member of Bradford Council the other week. So we had a meeting in Bradford College. We had NGN there. I'm sure they won't mind me saying, because it's kind of open for everyone to read, to talk about hydrogen production in Bradford. We had the college that was saying we want to be front and centre to deliver training for the workforce that's being created. And brilliant, we had a local MP there who said, this is Bradford's future. And then we were chatting, we're all being very honest about what we knew and didn't know about hydrogen. The college said, we want to know everything. Come and tell us first. Come and do a CPD day for us, which is fabulous. The guy at NGN said, well, I've worked in hydrogen for about 10 years, so I'm actually I know around it, but I know that my engineers are crying out for some information. But really interesting, just to follow on what you said, was the Member of Parliament said, I think we should understand it better. We are heading into this big kind of development and expenditure program. We're gonna create loads of jobs here. I feel that we owe it to ourselves to also really get to understand everything. And it's then when you start thinking about, well, who doesn't? It's easier to answer who doesn't rather than who should, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a big education piece that's needed across the board. And that's part of what Hydrogen UK is doing. We're meeting with tens, hundreds of MPs to try and make sure that they understand the positive role that hydrogen can make in their communities, both in terms of decarbonising industries or decarbonising different things that are happening in their industries, but also in terms of creating jobs, and the economic value that hydrogen can bring. And I think this is something which we sort of can't emphasize enough, the sort of unique opportunity that there is in hydrogen when it comes to the energy transition. Many of the energy transition technologies are already reasonably mature. Their supply chains are already sort of locked in elsewhere. Perhaps there's some areas where the UK has traditionally been quite good at deploying technology, but not very good at developing and manufacturing technology. And hydrogen's in a really interesting space in that we know that it's going to be an enormous global market. But at the moment, it's anyone's game. It's really up for grabs as to who's going to emerge as the global leader and capture that economic value from hydrogen. And the UK is actually really, really well placed to emerge as one of the global leaders. We've got an absolutely killer project pipeline full of amazing projects, not just in terms of the quantity of projects, but also in terms of the quality and the maturity of those projects. Industry and hats off to the government, who've done a lot of work in developing the policy frameworks to unlock some of that. We've got some really sort of world-leading companies that are developing manufacturing stuff in the UK. We've got world-leading research institutions. We've got all the ingredients that we need to develop a world-leading hydrogen economy. We've just got to, hit the go button and actually start moving on some of this stuff.
I think we've been surprised and delighted that, for whatever reason, I'm sure Lizzie will come on to it with some of the questions, there feels like there's some momentum now. And then all of a sudden, people are going, we don't know enough about this thing, this gas, this explosive time bomb that everyone keeps talking about. So we're now saying, well, okay, Mr. Council, you should come to a session that we'll organise at the college and we'll deliver what is it? What do you need to know? Where does it come from?
Yeah, and I think, that basic understanding of hydrogen is missing in a lot of areas. And as an industry, we need to do better at explaining what hydrogen is, what its benefits are, how it's going to impact people's lives, and across a really wide range of stakeholders. So as the one you sort of brought up there, sort of MP, so Hydrogen UK is going to be running some sort of webinar workshops for MPs, sort of post-party conference season, to try and educate, particularly because we've got a whole new set of MPs who are probably, many of whom have got a fairly standing start when it comes to hydrogen. So we're going to be running those sessions sort of back end of the year, trying to upskill and educate some of those MPs and those sort of key decision makers. But yes, absolutely, we need to be educating people on hydrogen across the board.
Yeah, so you were mentioning it before, Claire, about the work that is needed across the whole supply chain. And obviously within the Hydrogen UK report, the Anchoring the UK's Hydrogen Supply Chain, it kind of goes into what we need to do to meet the 20 gigawatt target for 2030. And I guess, addressing the skills gap is going to be so important, but it's just one piece of the puzzle. There's so many other things that we need to be doing if we are to realise that target. So if we're taking skills out of the equation, what do you think is going to be the biggest challenge as we're shifting towards a net zero hydrogen economy?
Yeah, so I mean, as I said, we published our sort of part one, I would say, of our supply chain strategy back in December of last year. We will be publishing part two, which is a much more substantial beast of a report, in September at our parliamentary reception. And that's going to do a real sort of deep dive into, which parts of the supply chain should the UK be focusing on. One, if it wants to hit that 10 gigawatt 2030 hydrogen production ambition, but also if it wants to capitalize on the economic opportunity. What are the things that are going to have the biggest impact? Where can the UK potentially lead? And then what are the actions that we need to do now in order to make that a reality? And part of that is to do with using the tools that we already have at our disposal more effectively. So the hydrogen business model is an incredible lever that we have. And so how can we integrate supply chain ambitions into that model? Part of it is, as you said, around making sure that our supply chain ambition and our skills agenda are actually well aligned with each other, so that actually we have the right skills coming forwards at the right times. And then part of that is to do with investment in supply chains specifically. So how can we create an environment, an ecosystem in the UK which supports companies as they are innovating, developing, manufacturing, all the way through from TRL1 all the way through to commercial deployment. How do we support our existing champions to scale up to be able to compete in that global market? And in terms of some of the challenges with hydrogen, I mean, come back to probably what is always the biggest challenge with hydrogen is that we are trying to match production, infrastructure, and demand all at the same time. All of these things have got to come together at the same time, and it's a big dance, and all of those steps have got to come together. And I'd say that is probably one of the biggest challenges, and that's what we see sometimes in projects where the production's coming along and then there's the struggle with the offtake, or the offtake's here and the production's somewhere else. It's trying to bring those things together. And I think, one of the really positive things that's happened over the last sort of couple of years is we're starting to see that come together. But I think we've probably made a lot of progress in production. The infrastructure side of things is still lagging behind. Those projects tend to have really long lead times. Hydrogen storage, absolutely essential for the new government's 2030 clean power target. Infrastructure networks, again, really important for moving from sort of point to point little projects to an ecosystem where people can sort of plug and play, and also being able to then produce hydrogen in the places where it's most cost effective to produce it, and then being able to move it. So we need to see things like Project Union getting greenlit and starting to be get those spades in the ground. We need to be unlocking investment in the infrastructure. And of course, we still need to get those production projects away. And then looking at demand as well, at how are we supporting off-takers to switch to hydrogen? How are we creating demand for hydrogen? How are we stimulating that market and supporting people to move from fossil fuels or sort of high carbon energy sources to sort of low carbon hydrogen? And all of those things have got to come together at the same time. So it's a big coordination challenge. And that tends to be what I'm sort of seeing alongside some of those things that I've just spoken about.
Definitely. I mean, it does feel like it's a juggling act almost to try and make everything work and
whack-a-mole
transition seamlessly. But just on the point that you mentioned about investment in innovation, we actually had a previous guest from season 1 who I guess kind of addressed his kind of pressure and stress with him being a really small business that's wanting to innovate new products that can work within the hydrogen sector, and how difficult it is for him, almost being like a two-man band, to be able to access funding. And I just think that is like also a really important piece that's needed. Is how are we going to support small businesses and small innovators to be able to kind of take advantage of all of the work that's happening.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's always a big sort of focus of Hydrogen UK. We've got a lot of sort of micro companies and little SMEs who are doing, often some of the most exciting cutting edge work, but are working within small teams. And so, we have a funding and financing task force, which is looking at everything from how do we get massive projects financed and taking those sort of investment decisions, right through to how do we support those smaller SMEs that are tend to be more nimble, tend to be more sort of adaptable, and doing some really exciting and important work in the space, and have a really critical role to play in the hydrogen sector. How are we supporting them in accessing, as you said, investment, finance, funding? So yeah, it's something that Hydrogen UK is looking at through our funding and financing task force.
Well, yeah, I mean, just kind of adding to what you just said, I read something the other day saying that SMEs make up like 80% of part of like the construction economy. So they're a huge player in this. So yeah, there does need to be a lot of focus there.
Yeah, and I think that's also something that's really important within Hydrogen UK is making sure that we're representing the industry. And sure, we've got some like really big companies who again really shifting the dial when it comes to developing hydrogen projects. We've also got a lot of really small companies that are doing really exciting things, and we need to make sure that we are really representing the industry, both the big companies and the small companies and everything in between, because ultimately everyone's going to have to play their part if we're going to deliver on our hydrogen ambitions and deliver net zero.
When Hydrogen UK reaches its 5-year anniversary or its 7-year anniversary, whatever the milestones are, how will you measure you've done the job that you set out to do, Claire? You as the CEO and Hydrogen UK as the body. What's the okay? We've cracked it, or we've done it, or we've achieved it, or we're what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ambitions that have been set out in terms of production, I actually think are probably the right ones. So I think if we've hit our 10 gigawatt target by 2030, then that will be a big tick in the box that Hydrogen UK has been doing its job properly. And then the second is that if we've got a thriving supply chain alongside that, that actually we're not importing absolutely everything into the UK, but actually we're capturing the economic value alongside seeing those projects be realised, then that will also be a sort of massive tick in the box for Hydrogen UK. Ultimately, I think that our ambitions are probably in the right place, but it's one thing setting an ambition, it's another thing actually delivering on it. So I think that will be the sort of key marker for success in, I guess, 2030 will be the point where we'll really be able to look back and say, how did we do? Which I guess is another 5 years from now.
So what you were saying previously leads perfectly into our next question, which has actually been asked by a previous guest on the podcast. And the question is, what would be your one ask of the new government to support green energy?
Oh, it's hard to boil it down to just one, isn't it? I mean, I'm gonna totally cheat and give you a list, I'm afraid. So I think, hopefully, I don't know when this podcast will be broadcast, but hopefully some of this will have happened. Who knows? So I think the first thing for us is get those first HAR1 projects away, get those contracts signed, get spades in the ground on those first production projects. Similarly, track 1 needs to go. We need clarity on track 2 and track 1X. So those two sets of sort of production things, they are ready-made, wonderful news stories for the new government to action. And we're pushing very hard to try and get those as quickly as possible. I guess the second thing is to expedite infrastructure. So this transport and storage business models need to happen yesterday. So we need to get those applications open, identify those really key strategic infrastructure, unlock investment, and let's go. And then I guess my sort of third one will probably be around supply chains, real targeted investment in our supply chains. So those are my 3 requests for our new government, and the sort of 3 areas that we're going to be pushing quite hard for the rest of this year.
I know that the new government have only been in power relatively for 5 minutes. Is there a notable change in attitude or action from previous to current, or is it too early to say?
I think there's always excitement when there's a new government in place. It's a new opportunity to sort of kickstart and turbocharge things. So I think what we've seen so far has been sort of very positive. Ministers very supportive of hydrogen, which is fantastic. I think they've made some smart appointments. Chris Stark at the Clean Power Mission Control, I think, is a great appointment, and obviously hydrogen, really critical for delivering on clean power. So that's really positive. I think always the challenge comes when it comes from talking about things to actually delivering things and making decisions. So, but signs so far are really, really positive. And we, as Hydrogen UK, are looking forward to working with the new government to deliver on our hydrogen ambitions and make some of those hydrogen dreams come true.
Well, yeah, hopefully we see that.
Before we finish, the next year's conference.
Yes.
So all joking aside, it was great and we had loads of great fun. I don't mean me and you, although we both seem to be having loads of fun, just on different sides of the dance floor, Claire. It was interesting. There was loads of fabulous people trying to flog their wares, and there was even the arrival of a peacock. I don't know whether you saw that, to kind of at the end when people were waiting for taxis, randomly a peacock had escaped from somewhere locally. Did you hear about it though? It was like on the front. It was on the front, kind of parading around.
This is the first I'm hearing about it.
People were outside going, "Wow, how did they get that organised?" And I was saying, "Well, you know that Claire, she's very influential." I had no idea where it came from, but it was.
It's representing the green and blue, different production pathways. You know, it's
Smart, very smart.
The peacock was peacocking. But anyway, I was going to ask you. I've seen that the announcements are out about next year's, and if we haven't already responded, just know that we're coming, right? What are you going to do? Maybe bigger, maybe better than last year. What's the learn and takeaway, and how are you going to apply that? And what should people expect from the second Hydrogen UK conference?
Yeah, well, we're very blessed within Hydrogen UK. We have the UK's largest hydrogen event, which is really fantastic. So last year, I think we had 650 people there. 70 plus exhibitors, all the sort of exciting speakers that you'd want to hear from. And it really is a sort of fantastic event. So next year, it will be the awards dinner will be on the evening of the 1st. And then the sort of full conference day will be on the 2nd. And we're sort of pulling the agenda together at the moment. And just we're really excited, but it really is, the place to be when it comes to hydrogen events. All the cool kids are there, including Andy, and great expo space. It will be bigger, it will be better. It keeps growing every year, which is fantastic. And we're sort of really excited to. We've got our headline sponsors already locked in, and we're really excited about next year.
Claire, I know Lizzie will do the wrap up. It was an absolute pleasure, and I am
Always
so delighted that you decided to come back from your holiday and get involved with us with this. So that was a lot of fun. Thank you. Lizzie, I'll shut up and let you do your exit and outro and all of those things.
Yeah, well, it's been fantastic having you on, Claire. Thank you for coming in to talk about your journey into the hydrogen sector and obviously to provide your insights on Hydrogen UK's ambitions. So hopefully everything that you've been seeing we'll see kind of in the coming months from the new government. But it's been brilliant having you on.
Thanks, Lizzie. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you so much for listening to The Challenge with Green Energy, brought to you by Hydrogen Safe. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, like, and leave a review. Every time you do, it helps us to promote our podcast and increases the chances of others finding the show too. For further details on Hydrogen Safe and how we are connecting the supply between businesses, individuals, and educators through our specialist hydrogen safety training, then head over to hydrogensafe.org and subscribe to our newsletter. See you next time.